welcome to Better Cocktails at Home. I'm Brian Johnson, and we're here in the Quarterdeck Club, which is our home bar, and we're going to do the next episode in our series on the secrets of the Quarterdeck Club, which go over kind of everything that we do to kind of make this our home bar. Some of the little fun stuff it does, some little design elements, why we chose to do things, to hopefully help people as they build their own home bars or give them ideas and just kind of also contribute back, because I've gotten a lot of ideas from other people too. So I think it's important to really, share what you know. So this episode specifically was one that a lot of people have been asking about, and we're going to be talking about our porthole. So that's by far and away the thing I get asked the most about on either how to do it or what we did or what it is, that kind of stuff. So we're going to answer all those questions. So it's going to be a pretty lengthy episode, but I'm hoping to go really in depth on this because I really want to. I think we did a really good execution of a porthole in a home bar, so I think it can really serve an example to other people to give you ideas and build upon it. So let's get started. So I want to just kind of paint the picture, because really I think it's really important to convey is you got to work with what you have often in home bars or any kind of home space, right? You're not, unless you're building from scratch, which some people do, they have an opportunity, it's great. But if you don't, usually working with existing stuff. So as you can see from the photo, when we got here, this entire thing was literally just a white wall, right? There was nothing here, just white, just drywall. And so at the time, we kind of thought we were going to, before we bought this house, we thought we were going to just take this whole thing, cut a hole in this wall and push it back and build out a big back bar and just be able to store bottles and stuff. That was the original plan. Once we moved in, we discovered that this is a large concrete wall. It's very thick, and so that plan to have a really big back bar kind of got scrapped pretty quickly. And so we kind of, through some trying to figure out what we're going to do with the wall, how it was constructed, we kind of came up with this concept of sort of the single line of bottles, really short shelves, that kind of stuff. As we got into it, and I pulled the drywall off, you can see some of these other photos I took of the actual process. Discovered that there was a 10-inch hole in the concrete that I believe was from a previous HVAC, some sort of ducting. And so it was there. So I had a couple options. Easiest option is just to kind of cover over it, right? I mean, I could have filled it in, but what's the point? It's not huge, just sitting there. I could easily take in this backpack and just cover right over it, and it wouldn't have done anything. Like, it would have been super easy, looked really nice. So yeah, that was kind of one option. Then I kind of started thinking of how do you take something that might be negative, how do you turn it into a positive, right? What can we do with this? Like, what are the possibilities? So behind this wall is like our mechanical room. So like water heater, boiler, bunch of pipes, electrical, that kind of stuff. So it's not obviously very fun to look at, but that means there's kind of, we can do a lot back there because it doesn't have to look pretty on the other side of this wall, right? So kind of started brainstorming, what can we do? So a porthole kind of rose to the top pretty quick because obviously it's round, portholes are generally round. And so that kind of started to ruminate and started to kind of like, what can we do with this, right? So I'm a big fan of a lot of stuff that Disneyland does and how they implement just rides and how they do that stuff. So I grew up going to Disneyland as a kid, and I really liked the Submarine Voyage ride there. And I really thought that the start of the ride where you kind of leave the dock and then they've got these like bubbles coming up over the portholes you're looking out on the ride was just a really cool effect, because it could simulate like movement and it could simulate like depth and diving. It just was really cool. So that was sort of a little bit of inspiration for me, trying to say, okay, how could I take some of that and incorporate into what we're going to do here? So that was like my main inspiration point. And from there it kind of started as how can I recreate that, right? So I really like practical effects, and practical effects are really interesting to me. They have they just take a lot of creativity to do well and do right. Digital stuff can be really cool, and it's amazing what you can do with this, just putting a screen up, and you can do a ton of cool stuff with it, but I just like practical stuff. So I kind of knew I wanted to do something practical, so trying to figure out how could I do that, right? So I needed some sort of thing to contain real bubbles if that's what I was going to do. And so before I kind of sat on the idea for a while. For me, that's how I generally process through stuff, is I kind of think, like I don't like to do things twice, right? I want to think through it, do it once, and be done with it. And so for me, I kind of just sat and started thinking and thinking, and then I started getting into the testing and prototyping phase because I didn't really exactly know how this was going to work out, right? And there's a couple things that are really important when you're designing a porthole. So one of the most important things, and we're going to talk about right now, is viewing angle. So this is my simulated porthole. And so porthole's round, right? So if you're looking straight on, straight through it, you just see exactly like this, right? This, whatever diameter this is what you see. I'm going to use this fun little drawing that my son did. So if it's right up against it, right? So there's no distance between these two. It's really easy to do and build. And it's really easy because you only have to take into account whatever that diameter is, right? It's all you're going for. But it's not really, it doesn't simulate real life very well, because if you think about when you look out a window, right? As you move across the window side to side, or you pass by it, you can kind of see other parts out the window, right? That's that viewing angle that comes in. When I'm over here looking in, if it's right up against it, I just see it, right? But as soon as I move it back, so it's kind of like even a couple inches, all of a sudden as you move the camera to a different position, you're going to see other parts of the image, other parts of the scene. So that's what I really wanted to kind of simulate and convey, because I think it's really important for immersion and that sort of thing. But as you increase this distance from here, you really have to start being conscious of your viewing angle, how much you have to cover behind this to really fulfill that immersion, right? Because all of a sudden, if you're looking through our porthole and you see a bunch of like pipes and a water heater, it kind of doesn't really, it just takes away from the effect. And then you're like, okay, I'm just looking through a hole in a wall. And it totally doesn't really complete the effect at all. So knowing that that part was going to be really key, and I'm sure you can do a bunch of math to really figure out exactly what it was, but I just kind of was interested in experimenting. So I ended up building this. This is just a plexiglass container. It does hold water. I built it. It's not great, but for what I wanted to do, it's important. So initially I kind of thought, like, well, I can use like a fish tank, right? It's a thing that's clear, it holds water, it's kind of already done, cheap, you can buy them all over. The problem is that one, even like a 10-gallon tank, one, it's the wrong size. They're kind of rectangular. I needed something more squarish. And also even 10 gallons, I think it's 8 pounds to a gallon of water. It's 80 pounds I have to deal with. So trying to like hold that up off the ground, that just to me was a non-starter. So I knew I had to create some sort of custom water tank. So I kind of built this as my prototype. What this allowed me to do is I could really adjust, I can play with viewing angles, how much I have to cover behind this. Because if you're really going to take into account, right? So like I had to think about how wide to make this, right? So the deeper I make this, then you're going to see these seams, right, when you're looking through the porthole. So you have to figure out what's the shallowest I can make this to achieve the effect while still allowing like access. You can clean it, you can put stuff in here, the bubbling equipment, without trying to eliminate these seams, right? So if you build out further, obviously you're going to increase your viewing angle so you can build it thicker and wider. So that's kind of why I needed to build a prototype to play with it. And then also to simulate the bubbles. So bubbles come in all shapes and forms. There's like big bubbles, little bubbles, lots of bubbles, few bubbles. And so really getting the kind of bubbles I wanted was really important to me. And so I kind of tried to do as much research I could online. And then I found some aquarium equipment that was kind of my idea all along, was to use just aquarium bubblers. And I found some that really produced a bubble that I liked. And so I was able to do that. And you kind of see in the image of my testing bench here is kind of me. I settle this stuff to run tests to try to find bubbles and sizes and that kind of stuff. And it was really critical to be able to complete this effect. There's no way I could have done it automatically by myself. So that's why we built the prototype. It was very important. It did leak a lot at first, but eventually I got it sealed up enough that I could at least test it and see if my concept was going to work well. So once I had that in place, it was time to start kind of building out the actual final pieces of it. That's going to be the components. And so what did we end up doing was there's a few different components to our porthole, right? So we have the main porthole itself, so the piece of metal. Now this one is, I think it's an older style. I found it on eBay. I've seen supposedly that the older style, so this has a really deep width right here. It's almost 7 inches, I believe. And so supposedly on older wooden ships, they needed longer ones to sit through the whole of the actual, like the wood planking, versus ones for metal ships are thinner because they don't have to have as metal ships, the holes aren't as thick. So this one may have come off a wooden ship. I don't know for certain. No idea how old it is. Honestly, I mostly bought it because it was the right price and it was the right size. It was the most important thing. And then normally they'll have like a glass, a piece of glass here on like a closing door. Some portholes had ones with glass, some were just solid, so you could just block out a light. This one didn't have it, so maybe one day I'll build one or something like that. But honestly, I think it works well without it because you're going to want to see in it most of the time anyways. So beyond this, we have the water tank, right, which is right here. Or this is my prototype, but there's a water tank back there behind the wall. It sits like this, right against it. Inside of there, I've got aquarium tubing going. I've got some bubblers, and those are tied to like smart switches and aquarium pumps that I can all control from my phone. So, for instance, I can control all the small bubbles that are kind of like a bunch of them. And just leaving kind of like a larger bubble. I can turn that one off, have no bubbles, and just have a little bit of lighting. And so, and then on top of it sits a light, right? A Philips Hue light that I can control the color. I can control kind of any color is really important, but then also what's really important is to be able to control the intensity, right? So this is one way that you can simulate depth. Right, so if you have 100%, the bubbles are going to reflect a lot of that light. But as you move it down, you can kind of simulate sort of depth almost to like how far underwater you are, where you can get really dark, you can barely see it. And it really kind of gives you an illusion of being deeper in the water, which is really important too. Just one more aspect that you can tweak to kind of get the look that you want. So the lighting is important, it's really flexible. And then beyond the lighting, so I've got the tank, that's kind of like provides the practical effects. And then to kind of take it to the next level, I have a TV behind that, right? So the TV sits another 6, 7, 8 inches behind the water tank. And the TV allows me to put, well, any kind of video content I want on there. And so we can... All right, so I just turned the TV on so you can see that. The remote control does work through the water, through the plexiglass, and to the TV. But you do have a very specific angle, actually. Like, you have to hit it just right. But anyway, so we have a TV back there that allows me to play that digital piece, right? So I kind of started with how to make a practical effect. And then also I thought, well, if I can do a digital effect too on top of it, I can kind of mix and match, that sort of thing. So I have a TV back there that displays content. Now the main piece of content that I use is underwater scenes, which is really, I think, kind of helps to build the kind of the illusion and makes the effect work. But the kind of content was really important. I actually spent a lot of time. So my first stop was YouTube, right? Trying to figure out like, oh, is there really cool footage out there? To work really well, the effect, you have to have a very specific kind of footage, right? Because if you think about if this is maybe a shipwreck or something like that, right? You're not going to have moving scenes. You're not going to have cuts and edits in the scenes. So there's tons of amazing videos out there, but they're like full of cuts and edits, and they just don't really complete the effect as if you were kind of sitting in a sunken ship or something like that, where you're not going to be moving, right? So you need completely static shots that are just on a tripod, underwater scene happening in front of the camera. So it's actually really hard to get that. I found one clip, this clip here, and this is actually of sharks and other fish in the Coral Sea. And this is from a company out of Australia called Biopixel. And they are fantastic to work with. They actually helped me license this content so I can use it on our YouTube show. It's really important to make sure you use content appropriately. And they're just fun to work with. And I think when I kind of approached them with, hey, well, here's this idea that we're doing, they're kind of like, that's kind of weird, but it's kind of cool. So they're really fun to work with and to get some other footage that I can use for other times down here. So we have about an hour plus or almost 2 hours of footage from them that I can run. And it just really completes the scene down here. So I have one of manta rays, one with sharks, like fishes, coral reef fishes. And so it's just that digital piece really completes the effect. Additionally, I can also run movies on that. So like we have our theater portion, I can duplicate that, I can run movies, and it's really an interesting experience watching a movie through a portal, because you just see a certain part of the scene, right? You're used to watching the whole thing, but when you see a certain part of it, you're kind of like, you can move your head to see different things, and that's where that viewing angle comes in. So it's really interesting. The TV is a 43-inch TV, and I think that was about the smallest I could get to cover the viewing angles, right? That's where I said it just gets crazy. As you increase the depth from the porthole, you have to just start covering so much more area back there to make sure you're covering all the viewing angles. And so those are the major components that make up the entire porthole system. And like I said, it works really well. I think people are really impressed by it, and really helps to complete kind of the scene down here. And it's definitely the most, like, the focal point of our bar, I think, in terms of completing the look, being everything we want it to be. Large sharks swim by occasionally. And then, funny enough, when I first installed it, this is a testament how it has a really awesome impact. Our son was 5 years old at the time, and we first showed it to him, and he literally thought there was sharks and stuff right outside and right on the side of the wall. So we had to take him back and show him, actually no, it's just a TV screen, here's his stuff. But at first he really thought it was sharks back there, which is really cool. So the next part of this video, I'm going to take you back to behind this wall, and we're going to look at the actual mechanical stuff, so you can see the setup of it, how I've got the water tank attached to the wall, how it's constructed, that kind of stuff. So let's hop back there, and we're going to go into some nitty-gritty details on the mechanicals. All right, so we are on the other side of the Quarterdeck Club. So while that looks all pristine and all planned out, and this is very much our mechanical room, as I said. So we've got, like I said, water heater back here, boiler, we've got cables, piping, all kinds of stuff. So the nice thing about that is we didn't have to I didn't have to try to make this area look nice too. But I still want to keep things tidy so I can move around, work well in here. But yeah, so let's take a look at actually how it's set up back here. So you can see, so this is the actual water tank that was built. I had a company in Oregon actually build this, because I sort of took my prototype and I was like, didn't do a great job on it, and I could try to, and I had to use thicker acrylic, because as I discovered with the thin prototype I made, even with just a few, that probably held maybe 3 gallons of water, even with that much, it would actually bow the acrylic out just from the water pressure, from the weight of it. So I knew I had to go something thicker. So I was like, well, I could try to mangle up $150 worth of acrylic, or I could just pay somebody a little bit more and probably do 1,000 times better than I could. So that's what I did. So I worked with a company in Oregon, and they did an incredible job. They actually build acrylic aquarium tanks for actual aquariums. So this is a extremely professional, well done tank with a 1-inch thick acrylic. And you can see I've got, so on top is I've got my light, right, that I can change all the colors of. I just have it sitting there, it shines down through it. These are the air tubes coming from my air pumps that I have going down into these bubblers down here. So I've got, basically, to create the 2 bubble effect, I've got these kind of longer air bubblers for aquariums. I've got 2 of those in there that are running off a fairly high-powered air pump. And then to create the large kind of slow bubble effect, I have one of these tubes still, and that's why I talk about having the kinds of bubbles you have to create. They're all different kinds of bubbles. So if I just dangled this in there, it would come out with small bubbles. So I could still control, it'd be a slow rate of flow, but it would still be small, but I wanted that kind of that larger bubble. So I actually took a piece of hosing, cut it off, and kind of put it at a slight angle so I could let the air accumulate and then release one big bubble at a time. So it's a larger bubble and I can still control the rate of it, which is really cool. So it's pretty much the tank, and I've got it supported with these brackets here into the concrete, and it feels solid. I feel good about it. And it's just a really well machined piece of equipment for this effect. Now beyond the water tank, we have our TV back here. So like I said, this is a 43-inch television. It's not perfect back here. I wish I could have centered it more this way on the porthole. And I went ahead and put it at an angle, but I put it at an angle to try to cover as much of that viewing angle as I could. And I think it works really well. And it's about as small as television I could get to cover the entire range. Because like I said, it really expands wildly after you start moving things back from the porthole. But it's a great effect. And so I've got everything, all the air pumps are tied into like smart switches, so they're tied into my lighting system. So as you've seen, I can control that. But yeah, so that's kind of the behind the scenes here. And so just a quick note. So this is, as I kind of mentioned, I had a lot of collaboration with this. So it wasn't just me coming, I kind of had like some of the ideas, but then got a friend out of Southern California who helped me a ton. Super appreciative of all of his time and effort talking to me through these things. The acrylic tank builder, and then our friends in Australia at Biopixel for supplying me with awesome content for our television. So it truly was like a global effort to create this, and I'm super happy with how it turned out. But yeah, if you have any questions about this kind of side of things, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. But yeah, so thanks so much for taking a peek behind the wall and what we've got back here. So we'll head back out and we'll close that video out. All right, so now you've seen all the behind the scenes of our porthole, how we created it. We talked about how I took it sort of from concept to actual working effect in our home bar. Yeah, so I'm really pleased with how it turned out. It's really like a nice focal point of our bar down here, and it's great to watch the bubbles and the fish on the screen and everything else. But if you have any ideas, or if there's something I missed and you have a question on more details, let me know. I'm happy to answer it. But yeah, so that is how we did our porthole in our home bar, the Quarterdeck Club. So thanks so much for watching this episode of Better Cocktails at Home, and we're going to see you next time.